And we have clients. That's their business plan. All their restaurants are trendy. I mean, and I just said I don't like doing trendy restaurants, but the thing of it is, their business plan, trending doesn't mean anything to me. Every 2 years, they want to do a concept. And whether the numbers are on the downhill side or not, they know in their business plan, whether it's making money or losing money, they're closing it in 2 years.
Hi, everybody. We're back again. This is Diane Armitage with Bruce Russo, and we are talking restaurant revenue and how to increase that from the very beginning to the very end and all the way through. So Bruce Russo is the GOAT when it comes to restaurant design and construction. He's created and constructed nearly 600 restaurants across the United States of America. And I have devoted 30 years to global marketing, particularly for restaurants, to help them with innovative strategies and concepts, branding, etc. So we're getting together today to talk about even before the beginning, because what we're talking about today has to do with your lease. Now, some of you out there are fortunate enough to own the property that you are building your restaurant in, or you have created your restaurant in. But the majority of the cases out there are people who are leasing. And what you really need to be careful of before you ever sign the lease are these specific things that have to do with the capital expenditures that you're putting forward for improvement of another person's property that you're paying rent on. And so what we're going to do is talk about how Bruce gets involved in these leases before they're signed leases so that you're protected and you know what you're walking into. Does that sound about right, Bruce?
Yes.
Yes,
ma'am.
Okay, so Bruce, you and I were talking this week, and you were telling me about one of your repeat clients. You've created many restaurants for him, and he was looking at going into a tower and wanted to be up on, which floor was he looking at?
Well, he was looking on the ground floor. The ground floor.
On the ground floor, okay.
Yeah, he was looking on the ground floor. So the ground floor space was under 6,000 feet. And this concept needs about 8,000 to 9,000 feet in order for them to meet their numbers. So with a 20-foot ceiling height on the first floor, we looked at creating a mezzanine level.
Oh, okay.
3,000 feet mezzanine level, which these are the kind of things that you really need to do when you're looking at a lease space. I know you got to spend the money to do your homework because typically it's a 10-year lease, and once you sign it, that's what you're living with. So you really need to know what the capital money is going to be, not just estimated numbers. So in this particular case, and you know, this client's a great client of mine. You know, we had a meeting, and I strongly suggested that let's spend some money. Let's do a preliminary design. Let's talk to their engineer and talk to my engineer. Let's get everybody on board. We'll talk to the mechanical engineers of the building. And in a particular, in a tower or a high rise, it's probably 30% more cost because you're connecting to an engineered building. So, and let me explain that a little bit better. The building is engineered for X. So if you're going to put a restaurant in there, they didn't engineer it for a restaurant. They engineered it for X. So when a restaurant comes in, it has to engineer to connect what their engineering did. And any shortfalls or pitfalls, like in this particular case, they had 200 amps of power. Well, we need 800 amps.
Yeah.
And if that was something that after the fact, that probably would have been easily a $150,000 item. So it's things like that you catch. The next thing is, okay, how are we exhausting the restaurant? And then the big question is makeup error. So now you're creating a space that's going to be a negative space in a high rise that's a positive space. So all the engineering that was done for the building has to be given to our engineers, and it's just a question and answer. And, how much makeup air and how much, how we exhaust, and do we need a pollution control unit? A pollution control unit actually cleans the air as it comes out of the exhaust hood. It goes to a pollution control unit and pulls all the grease, pulls all the odor, and then blows 99% clean air. Well, the price tag on those are about $450,000.
Nice. Okay.
So,
yeah.
You start adding it up and it gets pretty costly. So when you're looking to lease, and, if you're one concept, it's one thing. If you have 20 concepts, we're going to get off the beaten path here a little bit. It's good to have your A++ locations. You can't buy that real estate because it's typically
Correct.
bought up for the high rises. Okay, so that's where you do a lease. And then on your B locations and C locations, that's where you build your real estate. And what at the end of the day, what you want is half your units to be leased and the other half to be owned. This way your balance sheet is much better and your accountant's much happier with that.
So without naming
world.
Names of this particular client, this client has how many concepts? 15, 20?
Yeah. Yes.
About how many of them are leased and how many of them are owned?
I think probably 2/3 are leased and 1/3 are owned.
Wow. Okay. Okay, so you went through the whole drawing process. You brought in your engineers, and then you talked with the client. And what did the client say when you said, this is about what it's going to take?
This is the cost. And he met with partners and they decided, and they walked away from it.
Right.
Okay, because by the time you get the engineering and the costs and the equipment and what it's going to take to build the mezzanine level, although here's a positive note. On a mezzanine level that's being built inside the space, there's no rent doing it. But if the rent has a...
Good point.
But if it has a 6% fee in it, then he's going to pay rent through sales on a percentage rent. So if he has a 6% percentage rent or whatever that is, in his lease, he's paying rent on it, but he's just not paying square footage rent. He's paying percentage rent, percentage lease rent. So, I mean, there's good and bad in everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like the good thing on this was that he walked away.
Probably so.
Yeah. Because you have come into many, many situations where your restaurant owners have already signed the lease.
Yes.
And they are not even aware of what they have agreed to in the lease.
No, and although they had their legal...
Even the very sharpest.
Yes. And although they've had their legal counsel review the lease for the terms of the lease, okay, they don't do the investigative work on the construction design segment verbiage in the lease. And that's what gets them in trouble. Here's number one. Their boilerplate lease will say the landlord needs to see the drawing package within 60 days. Well, I can tell you...
Barely possible.
You can do a schematic design, but you're not getting all the architectural, all the finish schedules, all the engineering, and all the structural engineering for a lease space done in 60 days.
It would be an act of God.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we do it pretty quick because everything that we got, everything we do is very systematic because we've done so many of them, and the team players are always the same. But then you got the permit process.
Right,
and
you're dealing with outside forces.
No one has control on a permit process. And we just went through a few, and the owners are upset. Well, why is it 4 months? Well, the city where we're pulling permit, they got 1,240 projects in permit right now.
Yeah.
And there's cities where we've done 14 months on a permit process.
Wow.
Laguna itself, it's got a quite lengthy. I mean, I know there's projects, City of Laguna, that been waiting for a permit for over 2 years.
Correct.
Which is totally ridiculous.
Right.
I don't understand what could take 2 years in the permit process.
Well, we could go into another episode on this entirely, but as you said, I mean, even at the very beginning, when you're first getting the project analyzed by planning, you're in there, you're typically thrown in there with homeowners who are doing sheds in the backyard and all this other stuff. And so you end up in this big pile-on of what is considered, planning, and there's no expedited way. And we've talked about this before when we talked about the LA fires. There's they're going to have to come up with an expedited way that's going to have to really move quickly for these people. But getting back to these leases that you were talking about, when you're talking about capital expenditure, okay, let's talk first about moving into a second generation restaurant. Like, for instance, I was just talking with a chef owner operator. He's on his third concept now, same concept, and he wants to move a concept to a larger space in Laguna Beach. And he's been haggling back and forth and had not yet signed the lease. But when you're talking about second generation going into a space like that, what are the big red flags to look for before you sign that lease?
Okay, let's kind of say the perfect step. If he's found the space, that means he's working with a broker. The next person he needs to get on his team is his design team and engineering team for the restaurant.
Mm-hmm. Which would be somebody like you.
Correct. And then he needs to get his contractor on the team.
Which would be somebody like you.
Restaurants. Yeah, designing and building restaurants is it's a whole different animal. I mean, although owners like to have 5, 6 bids, 7, 8 bids, it's really a waste of everybody's time because the costs are what they cost. Okay, and what a lot of owners don't understand, and a lot of cities don't understand, if you look at a package for a restaurant and you look at a planned package for a restaurant and then you look at a planned package for a hospital, they're almost identical. The only thing that's missing in the restaurant is medical gas. Okay, so when it comes to the permitting process, typically there's minimum 6 professional disciplines have sealed drawings in that package. Okay. What is this? What is the city? And typically cities don't have, some do, some don't, but if I had to say 60% of city plan reviewers they don't have a professional seal. So if we got 6 disciplines that have sealed the plans and it goes to the city plan review, what is somebody that's not an educated professional that doesn't have a seal, what is he going to tell the 6 people that do?
Very good point.
Okay. We don't design things to see if we can get caught somewhere. We design things so our seals are protected.
Correct.
Okay. We don't design things and put mistakes in there. We design things everybody that has a seal designs things to protect their seal. So
correct.
I don't understand this 60 days 60 days is pretty much the norm, but I don't understand 12 months, 14 months, 16 months, 2 years of plan review. You can go through a whole set of drawings in less than 2 hours.
Well, and what's interesting is that once you sign that lease, you may be able to stave off paying the rent, the monthly rent, for a few months, but no landlord is going to let you stave off for very long.
No, there's no. And so landlords don't let you sign a lease and say, okay, we're going to wait for your permit process before you start charging rent. I mean,
correct.
There may be 1 or 2, and if that is the case and they've agreed to that, then they're a partner in the restaurant deal to begin with because they understand that process. So it all,
Hmm.
it all goes hand in hand. Uh, the lease and the permitting and the design work and the engineering, it all goes together. And I can tell you that the biggest monkey wrench in that whole package and the whole process, and it affects the lease, it affects the terms of the lease, it affects the landlord's rent, it affects everything, are the city plan reviews. And I know we're
Right.
getting a bit off a topic here, but, you know, it's always best to do your homework prior to signing a lease. I mean, I can tell you that when people come to us and say, hey, we want to hire you to design a restaurant, I just signed the lease 2 weeks ago. We don't take that client
Wow.
because they have no idea what they've just done. They have
Right.
Bruce, it's a second gen space. Wait until you see it. Well, second
Right.
gen space, you asked the question. Okay, when was it built? If it's 10 years old, it's got complete code issues. The electrical's not
Hmm.
to code, the mechanical's not to code because the code's changed. So,
Absolutely. Well, even this restaurant that this particular chef is considering, chef operator, I would say it's 6 years old, 6, 7 years old. But you can't assume that everything was just hunky dory, left in perfect condition when you're dealing with all of these code changes that are happening, when you're dealing with settling, when you're dealing with sewage, when you're dealing with all kinds of things. So when you have somebody who says, hey, we just got into a space, it's 2 years old, it's awesome. What would you say about that?
I would still, our standard procedure, take all the
Hmm.
engineers out there. We'd completely walk the space and review everything that's there. We test the CFMs on the hoods. We test the makeup air. All that's because it all becomes an issue.
Okay, now tell people what a CFM on a hood is.
Okay, that's the air of it's a cubic foot of air going through the ductwork. So prior to getting a final HVAC inspection, there's a balance test done. Okay, and the balance test, it tests how much air is going up the hood, how much air is coming in the makeup air, and then your air conditioning. So when you got a perfectly balanced space, what we say a positive balance, when you
Hmm.
open the door, you should feel a little whoosh of air on your face.
Hmm.
Okay, if you pull the door and it's a little bit of a struggle, the space is negative and it's not balanced properly. So what does that mean?
Right.
That means that air-conditioned air or heated air is going up the exhaust hood. Because the exhaust hood, it's sucking air out. And if the makeup air is not replacing the air that's being sucked out, the hood doesn't care where it gets the CFMs to make it work. So every time a door
Correct.
opens, that relieves the negative pressure.
Okay.
And
Good
I mean,
education.
I'm taking you to engineering school here, but the
That's all right.
simplest way to do that, and everybody should know that when they open a door, if there's a light whoosh of air on your face, it's perfectly balanced. And what does that mean? Well, you're never going to smell sewer gas. You're never going to smell odors from the kitchen. It's not going to happen. I mean, how many restaurants have you been where you smell sewer gas?
A couple.
Okay. So everybody thinks it's a plumbing issue. Well, I can tell you majority of the time, it's not a plumbing issue. What it is a makeup air issue because, as I said, the hood's going to pull air from somewhere and it'll
Interesting.
air out of the plumbing system. And it's people like, well, there's water in the P-trap. Doesn't matter. I've watched hoods pull air out of the P-trap where the P-trap bubbles. And the air that it's
My.
pulling is sewer gas air. And what happens is it goes into the air system, gets into the return air of the restaurant, and now the entire restaurant smells sewer gas. And I would say
Interesting.
that's probably 80%. Whenever there's sewer gas, 80% of the time, that's the issue. And if you went on the
Interesting.
restaurant, if you went on the roof of the restaurant, you would find that there's probably a belt missing on the makeup air unit. The motor's burned up. Something is not working. So it's out of balance. And so the hood's going to pull air from somewhere.
Very interesting. So
You
what
know,
other things are you? Go ahead.
The project we were on a couple of weeks ago, you know, they had makeup
The
area
one in
issues
Florida?
and they had their back door open. And that was
Right.
relieving the issue, the problem. But
Then it can cause other problems.
then now we're talking a health issue.
Right.
So that we'll save that one for
Another story.
another story.
So
yes.
give me another example of dealing with lease factors and when people come to you and they're not realizing what they've actually signed in the lease. I know that this has happened with you in a couple of the projects you're working on right now.
Well, what they don't understand is, well, you know, Bruce, we just signed a lease and it's second-gen space. There's exhaust hoods, there's electricals there, the exhaust, the walk-in coolers there. We got quite a deal. Well, I hate to tell you, he didn't get a deal. Okay, because the HVAC, because he didn't have anybody check. Let me just give you an example. The air conditioning system, there's 8 air conditioning units on the roof. 2007 is when they were manufactured. Okay. And in the world we live in.
And if that's in Dallas, Texas, good chance they're a little overworked and tired at this point.
Have been. Okay. And then, you know, I'll tell you another thing I'd check is, and I don't, you know, there's companies out there that water jet sewer systems, and there's one that's coast to coast. First thing you do is call them and ask them, give them the address and ask them for the log. How many times you've been here? Well, if they've been there to clean sewer lines, oh yeah, we're there every 2 weeks. Well, you know, the sewage system needs to be revamped. So then we bring somebody in with a camera and run the camera all through the sewer lines, and guess what? Sewer lines do rot. You know, the acid in the soda, if it's cast iron pipes, typically the acid in the Coke, in the syrups for the Coke machines, play havoc on cast iron.
Wow, interesting.
Typically, all of the P-traps at the bar are typically full of straws. You know, because when they dump the drink, it goes in the drain, and so although the water's still flowing through them, you can't even get a camera there because the whole 4-inch drain line is full of straws.
Wow. Okay. So what happened with this gentleman that you were working with who hadn't, tested the HVAC?
Well, so the HVAC's an issue. The exhaust hoods are an issue. The exhaust fans are an issue. And the electrical service is an issue. I mean,
and everything in the lease basically said he was in charge of repairing and renewing all of that. Wow.
Yes.
What do you think that would amount to in that situation?
In excess of $800,000.
Okay. Yeah. Tenant improvement.
Yes.
Really interesting.
And the lease, the verbiage in the lease says that you're going to operate a restaurant there. You know, and there's some verbiage in the whereas and who is on how you get there, but there's nothing in there that says how you're supposed to do it. You're the restaurant owner. You're supposed to know how to operate it, and you're supposed to know what it takes to get it operational. And if you don't, you should know the people that to hire to get it operational.
Correct.
It's a very complex business, and you and I have had this conversation many, many times. You know, it's a tough business. It's hard to operate the restaurants, but it's even harder to build the machine. You have to build the machine properly.
Yes.
Because with the staff issues and supply issues that you have in a daily operational day, the last thing you need is facility issues.
Correct. Well, and the facility issues can hold you back for months.
And, you know, if it's a big chain, they have facility departments and facility managers that stay ahead of their issues. They have maintenance programs. They control all their HVAC units from one control room. It doesn't matter where they're at. If their control office is in Phoenix, Arizona, and they got restaurants in Cleveland, Ohio, they control that air conditioning and heat in Phoenix, Arizona. They can move the thermostat all they want in Cleveland, Ohio. It does nothing until the computer in Phoenix tells that heat unit to do whatever it's programmed to do. I mean,
that is the truth.
But
yeah,
these companies have spent the money to do the homework to initiate those programs, and they save millions of dollars in maintenance.
Of course, correct. And these are, of course, these larger franchises and chains. They're not these, single one-offs, two-offs, three-offs, And like you said, there's an expectation that they're supposed to know what to do with everything in that space as far as the structural and mechanical engineering goes. They need pros.
It's a totally different program when they view a lease and a lease is proposed to them than it is when the one off, two off, three off. The 1 to 10 restaurants, there's not enough. You're not generating enough profit to pay a facility maintenance team. You got to get upwards around 20. So you have a guy that has a phone number, and typically he's a handyman or, typically a local electrician or a local air conditioning guy that takes care of them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So that's really interesting about the whole lease. Now, I know that a lot of owner operators they're so eager to get into the space, and especially when there's high demand for the spaces. Yes. And I can see where they would be very impatient with the process of you saying, wait, no, don't sign a lease. Don't sign a lease until we're able to do this. So when you say don't sign a lease and you move in with your structural engineers, et cetera, and you do all of that research and work, about how much time does it take?
We typically have a pretty good idea in less than 10 days.
Okay. All right. So 10 days can save you months and months of pain and
correct
millions of dollars.
But you have to understand the proper way to do this. Like I said, there's a broker involved with the owner, right? And then we would typically be the second guys in, and we converse with the property manager of the landlord. So, the landlord knows due diligence work is going on. And if the LOI was negotiated correctly, 30 days is not abnormal to do your, discovery work.
Correct. So when you were talking with this owner this week about moving into that space, building out the mezzanine, all of that expense and cost, how long did it take them to decide to move to another space?
They didn't decide to move to another space. They decided not to take that particular space. I don't know what the agenda is. I can tell you that they had a LOI, a pretty strong LOI. I was involved in probably 4 conversations with the structure of that LOI. And that LOI allowed us 60 days to do our due diligence in order for this owner to make the proper financial decision.
Correct. Well, the same thing happens in the housing industry. You're given that time frame to do your due diligence.
Yes.
With the ability to walk away and remove your escrow money,
Yes.
So it's interesting though. So you had told me a story about negotiating a lease where you actually ended up with free rent for years.
Yes.
So let's close this session with a happy story about how you got involved in the lease negotiation, because honestly, it's great to have you involved in lease negotiations because you have built so many of these restaurants, designed so many of these restaurants, and you've worked with strip malls, you've worked with towers, you've worked with all of it, and you've worked with all of the basic personalities and styles of these landlords and property owners.
Yes. So this particular structure, I'm not going to name names or say where it was at, but it was a national developer that was developing it was lifestyle center. So, I mean, it was a substantial center. It was probably $100 million project. And the client at the time was looking to put 4 restaurants in there. And in lease negotiation, the broker for the developer kept bringing up, well, we got this national tenant, and you're going to be right across from him. And we know, as a matter of fact, when any restaurants across from this tenant in any of our centers, they do more than $1,000 a foot in revenue.
And this was a few years ago.
Well, yeah, this is 16 years ago.
Right. So $1,000 a foot
great.
in revenue was a lot in 15, 16 years ago.
Yes. And so, probably by the 3rd or 4th meeting, I said, you know what? Pretty strong tenant you keep bringing up here. This phenomenon tenant that just creates revenue for restaurants. So why don't we do this? If they don't come, the rent is free for the term of the lease. He said, I'll sign that in a minute. And he did. And 6 months later, that big retailer went bankrupt. And
there wasn't anything they could do. How many years of free rent did you get?
8.
8. It's not bad.
But let me just tell you this: the restaurants never did $1,000 a foot.
Wow.
It wouldn't have mattered if that big box tenant was there or not. They would have never seen $1,000 a foot. I mean, and I recently I was in the city probably a year ago, and I made it a point to go through the entire lifestyle center. And I can tell you that when they were putting it all together, I would say 85% of the tenants were A-plus tenants. And when I went through a year ago, there was no A-plus tenants. They were all B and C tenants.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
So the entire center really just took a bad spin. And, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Real estate and restaurants are a risky business.
It is.
Well,
and I know operators who will sign 20 and 30-year leases. And that's, if you're signing a lease for 20 or 30 years, you're really putting the future tenancy of your restaurant in someone else's hands.
Yes.
I mean, even if they are in existence and they've proven that they have this thing going on that seems to be working, you have no idea who they're going to sell to, what they're going to do in a 20 or 30-year time frame. I mean, 10 years is dodgy.
I can tell you that 40%, I'd say 40 to 50% of my clients have, typically all of them sign 10-year leases with 2 5-year options. So the total term is 20 years. And I have quite a few tenants that have turned the 10-year, the 15-year, and the 20-year. But at 20, the whole market's a different market. 20 years. The whole market's starting to change at 10. So
right, I would agree.
If you're in at 10 and you're going to extend the next 5, it's time for a total redo.
Mm-hmm.
Because the 40-year-old market that you opened to 10 years ago, they're not entertained by that concept anymore. Because they're 50 years old now, and they have a whole different appetite. They have a whole different way of how they experience their dining. So at 10 years,
quieter for one thing.
Yeah, exactly. And in 10 years, I would strongly advise it's time to do a major renovation.
Mm-hmm.
And not change the concept.
Reconcepting the brand.
Just bring the brand up to date.
Revitalizing it for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that I think that drives a lot of failures in restaurant business.
Just holding on and holding on?
Just
without doing any kind of revitalization?
Correct. Yes. And, we've had those comments. We've had those conversations and comments about, when to renovate and how to renovate and how much. And, it's a very competitive market. And if somebody can go 2 doors up to a restaurant that's 2 years old versus a restaurant that's 10 years old, you better have some pretty good tasting product that you're building that you're making in your manufacturing plant in the back and bringing out to the clientele in the front.
Correct. Those bells and whistles have got to be solid. Yeah.
It's when you look at it, trends in the restaurant business are very strong. I particularly don't like doing trendy restaurants because they come and go. But, the average age is 2 years. And I can tell you, they can really cause havoc for a solid restaurateur that's been in town for 10 years. And the trendy ones come in, it's all flash and sizzle, and they're not there very long. And, it peaks the first year, and then it's on a downhill side the second year. And then, now you got empty space. And now it's time for another restaurant to negotiate the lease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like we've said before, and we'll talk about this more in our other episodes, sometimes those trend restaurants, when they land it correctly and they're willing to live on the edge, they can actually make a lot of money, pull a lot of money out of the market, move to another location, do the same, move to another location, do the same. But boy, it can be very risky. But like you said, it does create havoc on the restaurateurs who are there in the town and have been for several years. And
we have clients that's their business plan. All their restaurants are trendy. I mean, and I just said I don't like doing trendy restaurants, but the thing of it is, their business plan, trending doesn't mean anything to me. Every 2 years they want to do a concept. And
correct.
Whether the numbers are on the downhill side or not, they know in their business plan, whether it's making money or losing money, they're closing it in 2 years.
Yeah.
And what they do is they get 3 locations or 4 locations within the same vicinity. So the traffic, when they shut it down in the second year, the traffic goes across the street to the one that opened 6 months earlier.
Absolutely.
It's very...
I've seen that strategy in play.
Yes. And it works.
It works.
Yes.
Yep. But boy, it takes some...
a lot of capital.
A
lot of capital and top-rate management. No, I agree.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I want to talk about in another episode we'll address is how partnerships can happen between the owner of the property and the tenant, and how you've seen those come together in successful ways. So I'd like to save that for another podcast episode because we're already at the end of this one.
Oh, time's up.
Time's up. We've talked and talked, but I absolutely love everything that you've provided here for us. And folks, we are going to be back for yet another podcast episode on restaurant revenue and improving every line you've got across the board and every pot of revenue that you have established or plan to establish in your restaurant. So any closing remarks, Bruce?
No, just stay tuned. I'd love to help anybody as much as I possibly can. And the more knowledge I can offer and clients accept, restaurateurs accept, it's, this all comes from doing it. And
absolutely.
It's,
and you can definitely be hired as a consultant for even rent lease reviews.
Yeah. I mean, there's a raft of things that we do. I mean, it's, the spectrum, however I can help. We get calls. I mean, I just got a call from a California chef that he's at a country club in Newport. I mean, there's plenty of people in the restaurant business there, but my dealings with him has helped him tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
So, doesn't matter where.
And he knew that you were the source.
Yep.
You're the goat. Yep.
He asked the question. He asked the question. I had him. I text him a phone number and a source to fix his problem in probably 3 minutes.
That is a valuable Rolodex to have access to. For sure. Well, thank you. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
Looking forward to our next podcast episode, everybody. And we will see you again soon on Mastering Restaurant Revenue. We'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.